Hello and welcome to the chapter on the Jobava London and white sidelines in the London. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on d4, d5, bishop f4, knight f6, knight c3, the ideal way to reach Jobava London. White can also reach this via knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4 move order. And we will be looking at some sidelines after knight f3 and knight f6. The Jobava London primarily was not popular 5 or 4 years back. Black players used to believe that the knight is extremely misplaced on c3 and hinders white's potential to play c2, c4 at some point. However, white still has a slight lead in development, which basically compensates for the poor positioning of the knight. It's not too dangerous, and black has plenty of ways to get a fighting position, but at the same time, white players can try it. We'll first check out the sidelines after knight f3, knight f6. Yeah. And then move on towards the Jobava London system. Let's start by checking out a3, which was played by Magnus a couple of times. White's idea is that after c5, white wants to play d into c5, and e6 is met with b4, where white keeps an extra pawn. However, pawn moves like a3 in the opening should not be ideal in most of the cases, and in this position, it's not an exception either. We just play e6 and prepare c5 so that this pawn is defended and dc5 would be comfortably met with bishop into c5. White's best move is bishop f4, where after c5, e3, knight c6, we basically get a better version of the London system lines since white has played a3 instead of c3, allowing us to play queen b6 in lots of variations and putting pressure on the pawn on b2. Nothing too dangerous, but if Magnus plays it, you check it. Knight c3 is also possible, but I really dislike the combination of knight f3 and knight c3. The knight is not going to b5 here, which is an idea in the Jobava London with the bishop on f4, so that the pawn on c7 is pressured a bit. With knight c3, there is no pressure, and we just play e6, looking to develop our bishop with bishop e7, and then undermining white's center with c5. If white plays bishop g5, we play bishop e7 and follow it up with knight d7 followed by c5 and castle, then develop on the queen side with b6, bb7. White has nothing special here, and this knight on c3 is misplaced. Let's move on to the main sideline of this chapter, 3c3. This is also a suggestion of Lee Kuang Lian in his course on the London system. As usual, the move is a bit prophylactic against c5, and that's the point. This was played in the World Championship match between Ding and Nepomniachtchi. I actually wrote the chapter one day earlier, and I saw that this line with dc5, e6, bishop e3 was quite interesting. And although the game ended in a draw, white had some interesting chances here. Rather than looking into all these variations, we can just play e6 and then prepare c5, since we are happy to play e6 in the main lines of the London system as well. The best independent try for white is bishop g5. Bishop f4, c5, e3 will transpose to the main lines of the London system. And if white plays bishop g5, the bishop is active here, but after h6, we just kick it away. Bishop f4 is not sound, as this gives us an extra tempo in the London system, which is always useful. While we meet, bishop g5 h6, and we meet bishop h4 with g5, bishop g3 with knight e4, where our knight is very well positioned. Black's bishop is about to be captured, and we might use the idea from Manhattan or the Gukesh QD, trying to trap the bishop with h5 and h4. White's best bet is to play knight fd2. Knight bd2 isn't great, as after h5, white has to spoil the pawn structure with h3, where we play knight into g3, win the bishop pair, and make this pawn weak, which we'll attack with bishop d6, or take on e4, after which we take back and then trap the bishop or win the knight. Therefore, white's best bet is knight fd2, so that after knight e4, de4, there is nothing attacked on f3, but we can just win the bishop pair. And after h into g3, play c5, undermine white's center. We could have started with bishop g7, but that allows white to play e4, which is a bit unnecessary. With c5, white can't play e4, since c into d4 would create an isolated pawn in the center. And if not that, we will play knight bd7, bishop g7, and castle, where we remain better due to the pair of bishops, better pawn structure, and more space in the center. That brings us an end to all the sidelines with 2 knight f3. We now move on to the critical Jobava London system. Now, one benefit for white with bishop f4, knight c3 is there might be some knight b5 ideas which might be annoying. However, since white can't ever play c2, c4, I don't really like the variation. Another idea why white players play this is after bishop f5, white has a lot of lines where they play f3 and g4 and gain space. I want to avoid all that and play the very logical e6 and try to be consistent with our systems in the London system. Now, our threat is to play bishop b4 and then play c5, queen a5, increasing pressure over the knight on c3. A very simple and straightforward plan. White's best move is knight b5, but the main move has been e3 in this position. Knight f3 has been tried by a few players too, which we'll check as well. We'll start by looking at e3, which is the main move by the number of games, but probably the weaker in the two main lines. This allows us to play bishop b4, get our bishop into the game, and now we have a very straightforward plan of playing c5 and then putting pressure on this knight with either queen a5 or knight e4. White's best bet is to play knight e2 and defend the knight. Also prepare a3 so that bishop c3 is met with knight into c3. The main move though has been bishop d3. White wants to play knight e2 and does not want to restrict the bishop on f1. However, we follow our plan and play c5, threatening to play queen a5, and at the same time, we are trying to challenge white's center. White needs to play this, otherwise white can't stop the plan of playing queen a5. And after dc5, we don't take back with the bishop and waste time with the same piece again. Rather than that, we play knight d7, introduce a new piece into the game, and prepare knight into c5, followed by knight into d3, winning the bishop pair. White probably should play knight e2. Since knight f3 runs into bishop c3, we now spoil the pawn structure and take on c5, followed by castle. We will then develop the bishop and bring the rook to c8, where we remain better due to better pawn structure and more space. It might be interesting for the viewers to ask that, hey, why don't we play bishop d3, bishop into c3 directly? The problem is that white takes b into c3, and basically white can anytime play c4 and trade the pawn. In this particular position with bishop d3, c5, dc5, knight d7, knight f3, takes knight c5. Playing c4 is not easy because we just castle, play b6, and if you release the tension, we will take back with the queen and take on d3. Because this bishop is going to be eliminated, black has a comfortable position, while without the threat of knight into d3, white probably had good chances to play the position. Let's go back and check out knight g2 here, which has been played by a lot of players, including Jobava himself. We can try knight into c5, but the issue is that white can gain space with a3, bishop a5, b4. Rather than that, let's just play a6. And the idea is the very cunning piece trap with e5 and e4, where the bishop can't move to b5. White has to play bishop g3. Many players might not be careful and just play castle. which was played by a strong woman player as well. We just play e5, and after bishop g3, play e4 and win material. The bishop is trapped. So if white plays bishop g3, but this is now a passive move and allows us to win the bishop pair with knight h5. Our idea is to take on g3 and then take on c5, winning the other bishop as well. So let's say white castles, we take on g3, h takes on knight takes, and play. If white takes with the knight, we take with the bishop. If white takes with the h pawn, we take with the knight, since now the bishop can't escape. And basically, we were after bishop d3 c5, dc5, knight d7, knight g to a6, bishop g3, knight h5, followed by knight c5 and knight d3. And basically, we have more space. We'll have the pair of bishops and everything's along with the better pawn structure if white plays h into g3. Let's go back and check bishop b4, knight f3, which was played by Naroditsky in one of the games. However, after knight e4, threatening knight c3 or c5, queen a5, black is already pushing a lot, and in fact, computer believes black is already better. If white plays knight e2 with the idea of playing a3 and bishop c3, knight c3, we play castle, and our claim is that the bishop on f1 cannot be developed easily. If white plays a3, now we can play bishop e7. Why? We are making a retreating move, but white has issues developing their pieces. White's main move here is knight g3, but knight g1 with the idea of playing knight f3 and trying to put the knight on e5 was tried by Magnus. However, after c5, we are already better. If white plays knight f3, white gets a standard position but had to spend a couple of tempos, which we exploit by playing the typical knight h5, looking to win the bishop pair. We are better because we'll win the bishop pair and have an open position where the bishop pair dominates the knight. If white plays knight g3, this knight is now misplaced as it's not going anywhere. The knight is not doing anything on h5, and basically it cannot go anywhere. If you remember, we discussed the concept that the knights are usually not so great on these four squares. We just play c5, gain space, and prepare with knight c6, followed by pressure on the d4 pawn by playing cd4, ed4, queen d6, where we have a double attack against white's pawns. Therefore, white needs to play dc5, but after bishop c5, followed by knight d7 or knight c6, we have a great position. If white develops their minor piece, we get our knight too, and we want to play e5 at some point, keeping in mind that bishop g5 is not a threat. White castles, and now we start with the prophylactic bishop e7 and then play e5. If we play e5 here, it's a bit premature, and after bishop g5, threatening bishop f6, bishop e6 and e4, white has some chances. But after bishop e7, being prophylactic against bishop g5 and then preparing e5, where we'll have more space in the center. If white plays bishop g5 here, we can just play h6, and white is forced to give up the bishop, giving us the pair of bishops and more space in an open position. That brings us an end to this line with e3. And now we move on to white's other side line, which is knight f3. However, after c5, e3, and a6, we transpose to a position which we have checked in the previous chapter. And that brings us to the strongest move in the position for knight b5. With knight b5, white is threatening knight to take on c7. We have a couple of ways to deal with it. There is knight a6, which has been played by some players, but I prefer the active bishop b4 check, getting our bishop out so that we can castle easily, and meeting c3 with bishop a5, defending the pawn. Our idea is to play a6 next, where the knight has to go back to a3, where it is horribly placed. Then we want to play knight d7, followed by c5 at some point, looking to undermine white's center. White has two important moves here. There is e3 and there is a4, looking to trap the bishop with b4 and a5. Before that, we need to check some sidelines for white as well. If white plays b4 with the similar intention of trapping the bishop, just like in the a4 line, we are right in time to stop it with bishop b6, a4, and a5. And in this position, we are already better due to the weaknesses on white's queen side. We'll play knight c6 next and put pressure on these pawns. And we may play knight e4 at some point and put pressure on the pawn on c3. Black is better because these pawns on queen side are fixed and are easily attackable. Let's go on to the second main line in this position, which is a3 and has been a favorite of Hans Niemann as well as Arjun Erigaisi. White is delaying playing a4 and basically just wants to play bd3, knight f3 and finish their development. We play a6 firstly and kick off the knight, forcing it go back and making it not threaten our pawn on c7. At the same time, the knight on a3 is poorly placed. White's intention now is to play bd3 and knight f3, and so we play the very clever knight bd7, preparing to play c5 once white plays bd3. If white plays knight f3, okay, the point is we can play c5 to bd3 since dc5 is not possible as we have knight into c5. And usually white would have the idea of playing b4, attacking our both the minor pieces. But in this position, we'll have knight into d3. If the bishop retreats, we retreat back with the bishop, looking to eliminate this bishop for our inactive bishop, after which we remain with two active knights and more space in the center. So white would probably play knight f3 here, and we will castle. Now there are actually three critical moves. There is bishop d3, which is comfortably met with the c5, and we know the idea. We want to play bishop c7 next and gain space with b5. If white plays dc5, we play knight c5 and look to win the bishop, or else play bishop c7 followed by b5. The other two moves here are bishop e2 and the very strange knight b1, which was actually played by Arjun against Jobava. His plan was to play knight d2 and basically claim that this knight on a3 was misplaced and the knight is better on d2. However, he has spent a lot of time in this process and he could have been met with knight h5, which Jobava did not play, but this is the strongest move. We are trying to win the bishop pair, and if the bishop goes back, we'll happily take and meet h into g3 with c6, follow it up with g6, and then play bishop c7 followed by e5, gaining space in the center. So white probably would play bishop g5 here, trying to retain the bishop pair, but now we start harassing the bishop by playing f6 and meeting bishop h4 with g5, where we keep on increasing space on the king side. And after bishop g3, we'll play f5 with a huge pawn mass in the center and on the queen side. At the right time, we will take on g3 and then want to play c5, probably with bishop b6 included, so that dc5, knight c5, b4 is not a threat. Black has more space, black will win the pair of bishops, and thus black has a very comfortable game. Therefore, let's go back and instead of knight b1, check out the main line with bishop e2, which was played by Hans and Pragnananda. However, we can now play queen e7 and develop a queen, which is a novelty and a very strong one. In general, c5 was possible here as well, but after dc5, we have some tactical issues due to knight c5 b4, while knight e4 was played in a game But after knight b1, bishop c7 takes b4, white is pressing very so slightly. It's possible to play this line, but I think queen e7 is a very strong move when now we are preparing c5. And the point is that if white plays dc5, we take back with the knight. And if white plays b4, trying to win the double attack and win one of the minor pieces, we'll get our knight to e4 and exploit that the knight on a3 is hanging, so bf is really not a possibility. White still has to castle, and now we could have played c5, but then white plays c4 and claims that they have a slight lead in development, and thus the opening of the center would be preferable for white. So we start by playing knight h5. Idea is very straightforward. We want to win the bishop pair and then play bb6 c5. While if white plays bishop g5, we play f6 and follow it up with the typical bishop h4 g5, bishop g3, takes f5, where black is strategically better due to more space, better pawn structure, and the pair of bishops. That brings us to an end with the very common e3 main line. And we now move on to the other sixth move sidelines apart from e3. If white plays knight f3, we'll play a6. And after knight a3, knight bd7, white has nothing better to play e3 and transpose to the lines which we have just checked. The last sideline could be to play queen a4, trying to win the bishop and giving a discovery. But after knight c6, followed by a6, white's knight and the queen are misplaced. If white plays something like e3, we play a6, force the knight back, and win the bishop pair as usual, giving us a strategic advantage due to better pawn structure and pair of bishops in an open position. And that brings us to the main line with a4. White wants to play b4 and play a5 next, trying to trap the bishop, which we meet with a6, forcing the knight to go back, as well as creating an escape square for our bishop. Sorry for that. White's main move here is b4, but knight a3 was possible too. White is now looking to gain space with b4 and a5. We now meet this with the typical queen e7, with the idea of playing c5, dc5, and queen c5, so that b4 is met with queen into c3. The strongest move objectively here is knight e4, but it's complicated, and after f3, we have to sacrifice our knight. I don't want to go into such lines because we have a very simple and sound line objectively possible where we keep winning chances, so why to give us the extra burden of memorizing complicated lines? White should probably develop a piece and play knight f3. If white plays b4, we now go bb6 and plan to play a5, trying to fix this pawn and looking to exploit the weaknesses on the queen side. We may also play knight e4 and start gaining space with g5 on the king side. If white plays a5, we go back and play knight e4 on the next move, preparing g5. We'll then play either knight c6, trying to play e5, or just castle and push f5. The position is complicated strategically, but black has plenty of play thanks to the central control and the king side space, giving us proper compensation. If white plays knight f3 here, where white claims that, okay, let me just finish my development, we get in time and play c5. It's important to note that after dc5, this time we don't play queen c5, as white has b4, queen into c3, and bishop d2, where we'll lose material. Instead, we exchange off our bishop first with bishop c7. We want white to take on c7, then we take back and look to take on c5, where we remain with more space in the position. White can try to play b4 to stop us from taking on c5, but we have b6 undermining this pawn. If we get b into c5 in, we'll be better due to more space in the center, while if white plays c into b6, claiming that if we play queen b6, white is a pawn up, We play queen into c3 check and take back on b4, where we have space in the center, but white has passed pawn. However, a key differentiator is that white's king on e1 is very weak, while this knight is loose as well. Black is going to get more pieces into the game quickly, and thus black has no problems to play this position. That brings us an end to this sideline with b4 with knight a7, knight a3, and we now move on to white's main line with 7 b4. Instead of defending the knight, white counterattacks and claims that after a b5, white has a into b5 intermezzo, where we'll lose some material or at least give up the bishop pair. To meet this, we can play the very smart knight c6, maintaining the tension and asking white to take on a5. If white plays knight a3, we now get our bishop back and have the typical knight e4, queen e7, e5 plan, where white's king side, lack of development on the king side, plays a crucial role in our strategic advantage. If white plays ba5, now we take on b5, and after a b5, we have the very strong knight a5, and now we are not losing material on the queen side, while there are clear weaknesses to attack to. The square on c4, the pawn on c3 are weak, and we have the typical knight e4 where we play centralize our knight. We'll castle, we'll play knight e4, and then we'll want to play bd7 so that this rook is defended and try to exploit the weaknesses on the queen side or gain space in the center. That brings us an end to a short and sweet chapter on the Jobava London. See you guys in the next chapter where we cover the other sidelines and we now move away from the main systems of 1d4.